Hey guys, today we are reviewing the Book of Joy. This is really positive nonfiction and I thought it was just a gem. It was a joy to read. So to celebrate his 80th birthday, the 14th Dalai Lama invited Archbishop Desmond Tutu to his home in Dharamsala, India to discuss the topic of cultivating joy. This was a widely anticipated meeting and people were able to submit questions in advance of the meeting to have these two spiritual leaders answer. And probably one of my favorite things about this book was that the genuine friendship and affinity that these two men have for each other was just so apparent. So there's three main players in this book, and I want to give you a little bit of background on each of them. So the Dalai Lama is a religious role and position that is passed on through generations. It's believed that he is the manifestation of the Bodhisattva of compassion, which is the patron saint of Tibet. And he's a political lightning rod, the 14th Dalai Lama is, because so China believes that Tibet should be part of China, and Tibet does not necessarily agree with that. They think that they should be independent. So the Dalai Lama has been living as a refugee in Dharamsala, India ever since 1959, and he's actually done a lot of work with preserving the Tibetan language, culture, heritage. He coordinates with the Tibetan government in exile, which is also based in Dharamsala, India. And he does a lot of advocacy work for peace, nonviolence, self-discipline, compassion. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu is the Archbishop Emeritus in South Africa for the Anglican Church, and he received a Nobel Peace Prize for his nonviolent opposition to apartheid. So in 1990, he actually helped negotiate with President de Klerk the dissolution of apartheid, the system of racial segregation and white minority rule in South Africa. And he worked very closely with Nelson Mandela once Nelson Mandela became president. And he did a lot of work in trying to bring the country together and also looked into past injustices that had been done. And I mentioned that there's a third person who has a significant voice in this book, and that is Douglas Abrams. So Douglas Abrams he's not famous, but so if you're like, who is that? He was the moderator for the conversation between the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop. So he's the individual who was posing the questions to both men out of the big pool of questions that was asked in advance. And he also would follow up with clarifying questions. And he serves as the role of the narrator for this book. He kind of ties everything together. And it's clear, scrolling through Goodreads and Amazon, a few people found his voice very irritating. I actually liked it. I appreciated what he had to add. He provided some historical context and background information on both men, both the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop when appropriate. And he also did a great job of explaining some religious background, especially Buddhism, which I think Western readers would maybe not be as familiar with what's going on there. The book does assume that the audience has no religious background or religious knowledge whatsoever. So the last thing that I wanted to mention that Douglas Abrams does add into the conversation is he provides scientific research that as relevant to the conversation, and I really appreciated that a lot. I finished this book a few weeks ago, and the topic that has probably stuck with me the most is this idea of a set point of happiness. And a baseline level of happiness essentially is that there's quite a bit of evidence that people have this baseline level of happiness. And with circumstances, your happiness level will dip up, or it will maybe dip down if something bad happened. And those dips and gains are temporary, and over time, your happiness level, you will adapt to whatever circumstances have occurred, and your happiness level will either dip back up or back down to whatever your baseline level is. And there are some studies that show there are a few events that are exceptions to this, including the unexpected death of a child. But I will link some studies down below. There was a study done that showed that lottery jackpot winners are not significantly happier than people who have become paraplegics through accidents. That is fascinating to me. And the best evidence for a way to increase your baseline level of happiness is to pursue altruistic goals consistently throughout your life and to think about yourself less. There's a few quotes from the book related to this that I wanted to share that I thought were really great. One is from the Archbishop, and then the next one is from the Dalai Lama. So it is, "Joy is much bigger than happiness. Happiness is dependent on external circumstances, but joy is not." And I think what he's referring to here as far as like true joy is your actual baseline level of happiness, not things that are fleeting either in a positive or negative direction. And then the Dalai Lama says, "The more time you spend thinking about yourself, the more suffering you will experience. A person is a person through other persons." So advocating that you fully become a human, become who you are by interacting with and being connected with other people. And then the narrator, Douglas Abrams, has a nice quote that I thought sort of tied these ideas together. And what he's basically saying in summary is that we shouldn't pursue happiness in its own right or for its own sake, because ironically, pursuing happiness or the things that you think will make you happy don't necessarily make you happier in the long run. It's the idea of there's a term called the hedonistic treadmill, where you obtain a thing that you think you want, and then your expectations shift or adjust, and you go back to your baseline happiness, and then you just keep pursuing the next thing. So you're never actually happier, and you keep going round. So what he says is, "Survey after survey has shown it is unhappy people who tend to be the most self-focused and are socially withdrawn, brooding, and even antagonistic. Happy people, in contrast, are found to be more social, more flexible, and more creative." And the book then ends with a summary of the daily practices that the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop do in their own lives, in their own daily lives, to cultivate their own sense of joy in their lives. So that was really interesting to me. And something that fascinated me that both men said that they do is that when they are suffering, they try to have a mental shift to not think about themselves, but to think about other people who went through suffering something similar to them or went through something worse. So those are my thoughts on the Book of Joy. There is so much packed into this book. There's bound to be something in here that you could hold on to and really connect with for your own life. If you have read this book, please let me know your thoughts down below. I'd also be really interested in your thoughts on a baseline level of happiness. I am trying to get back into uploading Fridays and Sundays, so I will see you on Sunday.